All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for COVID-19 questions, the latest in the series and the latest in a series on vaccines. This will, I think, will be our third installment talking about vaccines. I'd like to thank In This Together Cambria and the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown for serving as sponsors of this COVID series, and the Tribune-Democrat. My name is Chip Minemyer. I'm the editor of the Tribune. I'm joined by our expert panelists and Pitt-Johnstown faculty members, Jill Henning and Matthew Tracey, two of my favorite people now as we continue to forge through COVID-19. Jill is an associate professor of biology at UPJ. Matt is an assistant professor of chemistry. Both of them are experts on the science of infectious diseases. And again, this is our third forum focusing on vaccines for COVID-19, which is a topic that, like the virus itself, kind of seems to be evolving and changing and needs regular updates. So glad we're doing this again. This, like all of our forums, is being recorded and will be available at inthistogethercambria.com and on the In This Together Cambria YouTube page. Audience members, you may ask questions of our panelists as we go forward. You can do that either on the Zoom Q&A if you're watching us on Zoom, or on Facebook Live, if that happens to be where you are. So hopefully you'll have lots of questions. I think we're going to start right off with the news of the day. Today, both the federal government and the State Department of Health paused the distribution of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine because of issues and side effects, namely blood clots. Folks, what do people watching need to know about this development? I guess we'll start with Jill.
So that's an excellent question, and I'm sure we all woke up today to seeing that. And what we need to talk about is that those recent reports have linked Johnson & Johnson vaccines to the development of vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia, which is an example of a blood clot. And it has been identified in about 6 people to date. You do have a very low risk associated with that particular issue. Currently, it's out of abundance of caution. So we're looking to scientists trying to figure some things out. They're looking at basic abundance of caution to see what kinds of, if there's actual causation, there's definite correlation associated. And there is some scientific evidence to back it up, but they want to re-evaluate the safety of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine before they start, before they continue to give it out to other individuals in a shot-wise session. So we are seeing results that are showing there's a potential response. So what is happening to cause these clots is based upon how our immune system responds to foreign substances. Like we talked about in the last COVID questions forum, our bodies make anti-foreign bodies or antibodies against a particular foreign substance. So what then happens is that when the vaccine is given and someone is also given heparin, which is a type of blood thinner that is used to treat some certain things, it causes the platelets to go from sort of like this, which is how they move around in your blood vessels. They're nice circular sort of donut-like looking things that can squeeze through all your blood vessels, to like this, a super spiky section. And then what happens is those platelets all spike out and they stick together to sort of make a like fishing net to catch the red cells to make a scab. But what happens is that happens on injury. When you aren't injured and you have heparin, and potentially in these 6 unfortunate individuals had a vaccine, they went like that and the antibodies bound to them instead. And so it caused them to clump together in the blood vessels instead of making a scab, which they would have normally done. They would have normally adhered to the damage in your blood vessel, but instead they're just a little clump, or what they call a thrombosis. Matt, did you want to add to that?
I just want to reemphasize that the risk of this happening has been very, very low. We've seen millions of the Johnson & Johnson vaccines being deployed with only these 6 cases. And as Jill did point out, we're still working to establish is there a correlation or just a causation, or vice versa, where we're actually getting actual data from? That is still forthcoming. And unfortunately, one of the things people are quickly learning with this pandemic is that results in science take a lot of time to be conclusive. But one thing to also note is that these blood clots you can actually have them develop in your day-to-day life. There's a number of environmental factors, such as sustaining an injury, a fracture, a muscle injury, being confined to a bed or limited motion. All of these can run the risk of developing a blood clot as well. So because we only saw this in these 6 individuals, it is something that is going to be studied, and hopefully we'll find out that there's a high enough benefit, which currently I would say there definitely is. The likelihood of a risk factor associated with the vaccine is very low, as we're seeing. And the more data that comes out, the more we'll see that the risk to benefit ratio is going to be very heavily favoring the benefit side of everything.
Right. And just to kind of put that into perspective, there, like Matt was saying, there are several other things that can also cause clots. There are several other things that happen that we take, other pharmaceuticals. If you're a female and you happen to choose to take certain kinds of birth control, your risk of clotting is about 1 in 1,000, as opposed to this 1 in the million doses or so that have been given of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking about risk factors. There are inherent risks in anything that you do. You ride a bike, you wear a helmet, right? Because there's an inherent risk in that. You drive a car, you put on your seatbelt because there's an inherent risk in that. You take the vaccine because COVID is worse. So that's one thing to think about. And I understand the pause. It's also great for us to be checking into the scientific data, responding to this to find out if it is actually a correlation, or if it's to find out if it is actually a causation, or if it is just a correlation that these kinds of things occurred.
You kind of started to go there, but I wanted to get both of you to talk about just how effective the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been, along with Pfizer and Moderna, and the fact that we should continue to move forward with these all 3 of these tracks.
So with the efficacy for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, a lot of people took immediate pause with it because it was reported as only 76% effective, whereas the Moderna and Pfizer were over 90% respectively. But really, the efficacy doesn't mean that you have, if it's 76% effective that way, you have a 24% chance of getting sick. The numbers actually show that 76% effective is really, really good, because the vaccine itself was 100% effective at preventing cases that would require hospitalization. And when it comes to getting COVID, hospitalization is really one of the worst possible outcomes there, because going into a hospital with that, it may end up with a ventilator, and from that point, the prognosis does not continue to get good. So by preventing the hospitalization aspect, even with that 76% of efficacy against full infection or even symptomatic infection, it's still quite effective as a vaccine. The other 2, we're looking at over 90%, which is better, though I know some people are hesitant with the 2-dose vaccine versus the 1, but at the end of the day, anything is better than nothing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I understand people's hesitancy about the Johnson & Johnson, because we were all given a huge barrage of news information today. But it's just think of it like Matt says, as a pause. It's a pause that we are going to sort out the information, find out what is happening. And if that's the case, it may be a subset of individuals that are directed not to get that vaccine, but other individuals it could be safe for. So for example, it could be safe for, a subset of our population as opposed to everyone in the population. So I think that we need to consider that all of the vaccines that are currently approved in the United States are highly effective at keeping us from getting sick.
Great. I would remind the audience, you can ask questions of our panelists either through the Zoom Q&A or on Facebook Live, and we will get your questions answered. Matt, before we wander too much further, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about AstraZeneca which has
Yeah,
some
so-
parallels, and that's not available in the United States. But you want to talk a little bit about that particular vaccine?
Yeah, so as Jill pointed out, this is currently a pause, and we may be seeing the vaccine be reintroduced at a later date once we have more data. And that's actually something we saw happening with the AstraZeneca vaccine over in the European Union. They discovered that it was leading to the development of blood clots in certain patients. And as a result, after reanalyzing the information available, they're now restricting who can actually get that vaccine, usually to people 30 and over, or in some cases 55 and over, depending on the country and the data that they're going off of. So even though we currently paused the Johnson & Johnson vaccine fully, we will very likely see it reintroduced in the future.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, Matt, the vaccine that vaccine in particular has been found to be very effective against the new variants that are emerging. And so it's a good thing for us to have that in our arsenal, in our public health arsenal on how to fight this particular awful global pandemic.
You mentioned variants, Joe. Can you talk a little bit about what the latest is that you've been seeing in terms of research that's out there and kind of what we might expect as a result of some of these variations?
Oh, absolutely. That's a good question. So I'm sure you've all heard several different things about COVID-19, and you were talking about various different ways that the virus is contagious, and you may have heard some things associated with the reproductive number of a virus, which doesn't necessarily mean that the virus is having babies, but instead what it means is that the virus, if individual is sick, how many people can that person get sick? And so when we started looking at COVID-19, the original variation, SARS-CoV-2, the first one, it was around 3 to 5%, or 3 to 5, its reproductive number, meaning that one individual who was sick would most likely infect 3 other people. When we now look at these variants, the B117 variant, and then which is the UK variant, and then the South African variant, as well as the Brazilian variant. Now there are 2 others. There's the California variant and the Texas variant, but those aren't getting as much research looked into. What we now know is that the predominant variant in the United States and in Pennsylvania is the UK variant, and it happens to have a reproductive number of 4.9, which, if we round that up, is one infected person will likely infect 5 other people, which is 2 times more effective, more contagious as the original coronavirus. So when we see these variants and the contagiousness is being evaluated, we know that the South African variant, the Brazil variant, and the UK variant fall between 3 and 4.9, or essentially 5. So all of the strains of COVID that are currently out have a reproductive number that are greater than influenza. The reproductive number is 1.5 or 1.5 for the flu. For COVID-19, it's about 4.9. For the measles, let's say, it's 20. So it's not as infectious as the measles, but it's more infectious or more contagious than the flu. So what we look at with these kinds of new variants is that we kind of look at the statistics and the summary associated with them. And so we tend to see that the median age of infection is around 50, but that's right in the middle of the population of humans anyway. So can't really use much for that number. But we also tend to see things like, even with the variants, even with their contagiousness, that children and pregnant women tend to be okay. So even with these infectious basic reproduction numbers and these variants being more contagious, it leads us to see that we definitely need to continue or still be masking up. We still need to be working on that herd immunity, and we still need to make sure that we are protecting the most vulnerable in our populations.
Good. We have a couple of interesting questions already from the audience that I think fit in well here. Here's one from Facebook. This person says, question about public apprehension. I am 72 and fully vaccinated. I still have to force myself to go out. I feel like I have Stockholm syndrome, relationship with my house. How should I work on this? Any tips? I always wear a mask when I'm out. Who wants to tackle that question?
I'll jump on that one because I've actually been feeling very in the same boat as that person. I was lucky enough to get vaccinated early on, and I still very rarely have to. I tell myself I have to get out of the house. I have to do something. And I try to treat it as just an extra part of my day of going out rather than making it a chore. I say to myself, I'm going to go walk around my neighborhood today and look at the nice houses. And I make it a little activity. I usually try to take something along so I'm not constantly thinking about other things. But when I'm at home, one thing that an old college buddy of mine recommended that I cannot recommend this highly enough is it's a way to sort of get out of your own head. He suggested that I just lay down on the floor with no stimuli whatsoever, no music, turn off your phone, turn off your computer, turn off the TV for 30 seconds. But don't count the 30 seconds. Just lay there until you think about 30 seconds has passed. And whenever I do that, I always feel a little refreshed. I don't think about anything. I don't worry about the world outside and the pandemic. For just those 30 seconds a day really helps keep me centered with it.
And that's really good advice, Matt. If you are concerned about going out and your anxiety or your worry is coming from other people and what you should do to keep yourself safe, what you can do is wear your mask. A surgical mask, an N95 or a KN95 mask are the best choices. If you can't do that, a triple ply cotton face mask is good. And if you can't do that, just cover your face with something and keep your distance. It's okay to go out and walk with your friends. It's okay to interact or talk with people. But when you're outside, just keep yourself, about 3 to 6 feet apart, depending upon how windy it is when you're outside, if you're talking. So think like you have one of those big cold tubes around your belly, and use that to keep the distance away from someone else. And that way you'll still have the ability to engage. Invite a friend over, have one sit on one side of your porch and you can sit on the other, have some coffee or tea, and get to ease yourself back into the normalcy.
Here's a good follow-up question that came in on the Q&A from Zoom. As all Pennsylvania residents are now eligible, and adult Pennsylvania residents are now eligible to be vaccinated, do you anticipate that the pause in the J&J vaccine will cause greater difficulty for folks gaining access to vaccines in Pennsylvania?
I don't see how it can't. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, what was wonderful about it is that it's a one shot and done. So we do have some transient populations in Pennsylvania or some individuals in Pennsylvania that have mobility issues. They maybe can't get to their vaccination sites. And so the ability for one shot to be either taken to them, to maybe some shut-ins. If you're a part of a church community, your pastor would go and do communion to the shut-ins once a month. That kind of ability made it really great to be able to have a one and done vaccination with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So there will be things that have to be taken care of. There will be some planning that has to occur for those kinds of populations. And obviously, we're only going to have 2 types of vaccines for a little while. So our supply has decreased slightly. So when we think about those kinds of things, I can't see how it won't slow the process of reaching vaccination or herd immunity in our community locally, both locally in our state and nationally, and then at the global level. So I can't see how it wouldn't. But I do know that we have a wonderful group of emergency management personnel, our county commissioners, the Somerset County commissioners. There's lots of fantastic individuals. Art Martinuska is doing a wonderful job coordinating a lot of the vaccine rollout here in Cambria County, and they're already on the problem. So they woke up this morning and started working to fix this issue.
one of the conversations we had off before we started was that there will be other vaccines available to pick up for scheduled vaccinations and things like that. Can you just kind of quickly react to that?
So the way that the vaccine distribution has been working is that there are two arms to the vaccine distribution plan. There's the arm that was associated with Operation Warp Speed, which was the federal government. And the federal government was supplying vaccines to pharmacies like CVS and Rite Aid and Walmart and Walgreens, those places that were getting businesses. I guess they're all of the pharmacies were businesses, so forgive me, but like those chain store pharmacies. And then the state was providing vaccines distribution to smaller pharmacies that maybe weren't associated with like Walmart, Walgreens, or CVS, and then also to hospitals. So that plan is being mitigated and changed slightly so that they can distribute vaccines equitably, associated by population, as well as by basic distribution sites. So the state of Pennsylvania has recently reduced the distribution sites to sort of streamline the process. So we have fewer pharmacies that will be getting the vaccinations. However, those pharmacies will be getting more. So they're going to have larger events and more possibilities. And most of them, like Mainline and Richland Family Health Center, are going into communities and giving their vaccines. They are traveling. You don't have to actually go to their pharmacies. So you're going to start to see just a slight redistribution. It may take a few days to adjust the planning for that, but I imagine that the lag will only be short-lived.
All right. We did get another question on the Q&A, and it's not specifically about vaccines, although it's about helping people get vaccinated. This person says, I saw a post where a local vaccine clinic is looking for volunteers. Can that info be shared with viewers? I think we can probably put that on the In This Together Cambria website for folks to access, right?
Absolutely. It's most likely already there,
Yeah.
but we can definitely share that information out. Myself and a few other individuals that are a part of In This Together Cambria are also a part of the task force between Cambria County and Somerset County. So we are actively seeking individuals that would like to help at vaccine distribution sites. So if you could just navigate to the In This Together's Facebook page or the website, you can see information associated with helping with vaccination and helping. We need individuals that can sort of help with registration and potentially help as a people mover, make sure you're monitoring individuals after their vaccine for the 15 minutes to make sure everybody's okay. Sometimes just generally being a smiling face for somebody who may also be a little bit afraid.
That's been such a fantastic resource for our community. I mean, what are some of the other things, if I went there, that I would maybe encounter that would help me navigate COVID-19?
On the In This Together's website, we have several different resources that are available. There are resources available for where you can get tested. If you think you have COVID, there are resources available for scheduling an appointment associated with your vaccination. There are common questions that are answered about the vaccine or about any of the information that you may be hearing about the vaccine, potentially like, oh, I don't know, that it causes infertility or that you have to be worried about breast cancer, which I'm certain that we'll touch on later this evening. There's information regarding individuals who have had COVID and their personal stories surrounding that, which can be very powerful to see. There's also information about people who have chosen vaccination and their pictures as well. And we're working on an educational resource page for individuals who are leaders in their community and may want to help anyone in their community that is a little vaccine hesitant. They can gather that information, learn about the vaccines and the virus themselves, and then convey that information to their groups. There's also abilities to access some brochures that have been made with different kinds of information surrounding why we should wear masks and what the different types of vaccines are. So it's an excellent resource. I think I may have forgotten a few of the things that are on there, but there's quite a few, there's quite a bit of information if you want to navigate to that.
Yeah, quite a bit. And yeah, you did a great job of outlining it, and hopefully people can go there. If you haven't already done it, once we're done here, go check it out. All very useful information, partly to help break down fears about things like vaccinations, but also to break down the myths that might exist out there, to help people understand the value of it. Maybe start with Matt. How do you talk to people who are opposed to vaccination? How do you kind of bridge that gap so we get more people doing that?
I've been trying to do this myself, and what I've found is that just talking to people with scientific results is really the biggest thing, because in this information age, everybody can find something to back up whatever they would like. And I've noticed, and people probably seen that if you aggressively come at somebody immediately and say, no, you're totally wrong, and very angrily approach them, they're going to dig their heels in and be less receptive to hearing what you have to say. Rather, I'm finding sharing a personal narrative or explaining the science things like we're doing with these little webinars here, and really try to show people that people who are trying to help them are doing it for their best interest. A lot of people tend to be very negative about what they hear because they get in their minds that they immediately know the right answer and just want somebody to parrot that back to them. And if they don't get the answer they like, it's harder for them to accept that. But if we approach these people with a kindness, and rather than aggressively shouting them down, say, I understand your concern. This is what the facts and the data are telling us, especially as we've seen today. The data can change regularly. Somebody a week ago would say the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is what they really wanted. Wake up this morning and find out they can't get that. They might be panicking. And so even if people are really aggressively against the vaccines or are trying to, diminish the efforts of other people, I always say just treat them with the kindness of, let's talk.
Yeah, you want to start with meet them where they are. You want to start with where they are, listen to what it is that they're thinking. And oftentimes there's a minute, minuscule rice grain of truth in whatever it is that they are concerned about. And if you start there, it'll make it a lot easier for them to listen to you, as opposed to everybody gets that sympathetic response when they feel like someone is attacking them. So it's best to just listen and see what they have to say first, and then tell them they're not alone, that their fears are okay, and that you can help them to alleviate them.
And we've started to post for our viewers some links to web information that we've been talking about. You can go there and see it, including how to volunteer with the mainline pharmacy program and things like that. So again, check that out. Here's a question that came from Facebook. This person says, it's been discouraging to see the positivity rates creep back up. And I would agree with that statement. What percentage of Pennsylvanians do you think we need to have the vaccination before we see lasting improvement? This is kind of a herd immunity question. How do we get there?
Do you want to start there, Matt, and then I'll pick up after?
Sure. Because one thing I've found that with the vaccination rates, and it's going to seem like a bit of a sidestep, but it'll come back in that one of the biggest things with vaccination was people have often said that it's not reducing transmission, and therefore continue to say it's not working. Because when the vaccines first came out, the conclusion was we cannot say that it is reducing transmission of the virus. Recently, very recently, I think I'll say it was as early as last week, new data has started to come out that shows that if people are vaccinated, we're going to start to reduce those numbers of transmissibility. As Jill said, the new variants can infect up to 5 people. People who are vaccinated, even carrying a small amount of the virus, are significantly less likely to infect other people. One of the big things was that they were studying with various monkey models that the virus being shed out of the nose, the primary way it's going to be exposing people, is significantly decreased post-vaccination. So make sure you cover your nose when you wear your masks. But also, just getting those numbers, the herd immunity is about 80%. And as I look at those numbers, I almost look at them that it is discouraging that the numbers are going up, but as the vaccination numbers also go up, it's becoming a battle of, one or the other. It's no longer this possibility that if we keep following the interventions of wearing masks, social distancing, etc., we can hopefully drive down the numbers more effectively. But as people start to get more complacent, that's why we're seeing them come up more than anything.
So here's a plea.
A plea.
I'm gonna ask you all this. In order to reach herd immunity, we have to have 80% in the population vaccinated, recovered, or dead. That is the answer, 80%. In the United States, 22% of the population are children. So think about that for a minute. I myself am a mother. Many of you may be aunts or uncles, cousins, mothers or fathers, grandparents. If we do not choose vaccination for ourselves, we are going to see this virus move to the children because they can't get vaccinated yet. So right now, we've had 3.4 million infections in children, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. That's 13% of all US cases, and their death rate is very low. It's 0.03%. There have been some multi-systemic inflammatory syndrome cases. There's been about 2,000 of those cases since February, through February. The March numbers were not out as of me looking for this information. There were 33 deaths according to in that area. The number of infected children will increase as we vaccinate adults and not the children. That reproductive number, it doesn't care what your age is. It cares if you have the ability for the virus to get in. So this is going to be a long haul unless we start to think about the kids. And I understand that I'm asking you to think about someone else's kids. I might ask you to be thinking about my son. And I get it. I get it. It's scary. And you all just want this to be over. You want to stop wearing your masks and you want to go back outside and you want to enjoy that concert or take that trip. But we have to be careful because until we reach the level that we can protect 20% of our most vulnerable population, there is a very real possibility that as we begin to vaccinate adults and not our younger individuals, that the virus will move into that population. So we need to be careful and start thinking about maybe you don't worry about your neighbor, but maybe you'll worry about your neighbor's kids. So think about vaccination in that regard for the next generation so that they don't have to have the issue. Now, all of that being said, COVID in kids is a lot milder. It's mostly like a little cold, but like I said, there is a 0.03% death risk. And if you are a loved one of a child, I'm certain that that number is enough for you to say, I don't want that to be my kid. I can definitely tell you I would take more risks than I would take with my son's life. So those are the kinds of things that we need to think about. And younger children are not dying of it. They're not getting as sick from it. So there is some light there. But what I'm saying is when we're vaccinating the adults to reach herd immunity, but 22% of the population in the United States are kids. So some of them are going to have to be sick or vaccinated for us to reach herd immunity.
And the kids can still pass it along, right?
Yes.
Even if it's not as severe with them.
Right.
Since we're talking about kids, why don't you bring us up to date on where we stand with clinical trials for kids and kind of how far down the road we may be seeing some of this stuff play out.
Well, that's definitely something that's been on the hot button issue. Very recently, Pfizer has studied its vaccine in children ages 12 to 15 and has applied for FDA approval. So that could be roughly a few weeks until we see that approval, which would expand the range slightly. We're currently at 16 and older. Adding 12 and older is part of that 22%, as Jill mentioned. And Moderna just last month has started working on phase 2 and 3 clinical trials with roughly 6,750 participants. So as we said in these previous meetings, casting a larger net than what we might normally see for a clinical trial, with the focus first and foremost being on tolerability and safety before anything else. So they want to make sure the vaccine is safe for children by studying that in a very, very controlled environment before expanding on that. So that could be a few months away for the Moderna vaccine. But in the case of Pfizer, they are currently working and seeking approval for 12 to 15-year-old children. So it's coming slowly but surely. The work is being done.
Jill, anything on the clinical trials you wanted to add? Or
I just think that's fantastic. The faster we can start getting our children protected, and because there are some vaccine hesitant adults, the faster that we can do that, the closer we'll be to getting herd immunity and getting ourselves over the COVID-19 hump.
One more thing I want to add in there, Chip, before we move on to another
Sure.
topic. And I've noticed a lot of people always mention in social media circles that these vaccines are experimental and things like that. And with respect to with the clinical trials we've seen before, these were probably the largest clinical trials to date for a vaccine. With the ones for these children, because I know a lot of people, as I am not a parent myself, but I know many people who are, and they would do anything for their kids. The clinical trials that are currently undergoing, and I actually had to look up this long list of organizations that are also overseeing it. So for the sake of safety, we have the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the National Institute of Health, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, on top of Pfizer themselves and Moderna actively studying their own vaccine. So there is a lot of oversight that goes into these developments. So hopefully that can calm a few fears that people are panicking that these vaccines are very experimental. They're being overseen by the best of the best of the best.
Matt, you are a parent. You teach at a university.
Oh, that's true.
Well,
I do often care for my students as if they were my own student, if they're my own kids.
couple of great questions coming into us on the Q&A. I want to get to those before we get too far off track. This one's circling back to the Johnson & Johnson. What type of shelf life does the J&J vaccine have? If the pause is not released for some time, will the doses of the vaccine be lost or discarded? Good question.
That's actually one of the benefits of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is its shelf life. Whereas the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, when they first came out, the big thing was that they required cryogenic temperatures being shipped on dry ice. The Johnson & Johnson vaccines are remarkably stable at standard refrigeration. So we don't have to worry too much about long-term storage. They will last a lot longer than the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. And because we can store them in standard refrigerators, any doses that have already been shipped and are validated to be good to go, as soon as the pause is done, even if it takes a little bit longer than we're expecting, we should be able to get those shots into arms.
Great news. Here's another question kind of tying back to the children conversation from Facebook. Do you have any stats on the long haul effects on kids? Do we know anything about that? Do we know enough yet?
So because there haven't been a whole lot of severe cases in children, those statistics are limited. And that's mostly because, like I said, they've only been 13% of all of the cases in the United States. But what we can say is this: the virus that SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19 uses a receptor called the Ace2 receptor. I'm sure you've heard that a bunch. It's a receptor that's found on a bunch of different places in our body. It's found in our nose and on our tongue, which is why we lose our sense of taste and smell. It's in our lungs. It's in the coverings of our brain. It can be in our bladder and in our kidneys. So those are the places where we're seeing the inflammatory syndromes and the long haul things occurring. What we do see with children who have not underwent puberty, the levels of that receptor are thought to be lower on those kids. And therefore the virus doesn't have as many places to go in their body. So they tend to have less of an issue with long haul symptoms than individuals who have went through puberty. So we are seeing that the individuals in their 20s, 30s, 40s are having more issues with long haul COVID. Then once we hit the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, those individuals are having issues associated with comorbidities and COVID. So with the children, we're not seeing a whole lot of long haul symptoms. It's a lot like a cold for them. They may lose their sense of taste or smell, and they may run a fever, but you've probably seen children with other kinds of illnesses where they're just like, their nose is running again. And so that's kind of what's going to happen for them with COVID in most instances. And that has to do with the way that the virus gets into our body and that receptor not being present as frequently in children.
We have a question and then an immediate follow-up question by the same person off the Q&A. So we'll jump to that. Should we anticipate needing boosters? This is by the fall. And to put that booster question in context, boosters for adults who have already been fully vaccinated. That's what the person is interested in hearing us talk about.
So there's a thing called the molecular clock that us biologists and chemists, Dr. Tracey, also like to talk about. It's a way for us to measure the rate of change that a virus is doing. And so the way we think about this is kind of with the term drift, right? So if you think about drifting on the ocean, you're not really going to go anywhere super fast. You're not really going to make any kind of directional change. You're going to just move with the waves, right? And so this molecular clock analysis allows us to predict that drift, that gradual change that is happening in the virus. We know how frequently those things are going to occur because molecular biology has been studying it for the last 50 or 60 years. So that can be timed. The chances of us needing a booster that quickly by the fall are not that great. Looking more like every 3, maybe 5 years that you may need a booster shot for COVID-19, unless some major antigenic changes occur, which we would then call a shift. And that's kind of what happens with influenza, which is why you have to get a flu shot every year. COVID-19 is going to drift. It's kind of like hula-ing along its way, right? As opposed to a gigantic change or a shift. And so it's most likely going to be a 3 to 5 year range for a booster shot, unless we see some major genetic changes that are not expected for COVID-19.
Matt, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so one of the analogies I've had a few people ask about this as well is with the vaccines, people are saying they only see the antibodies for 3 months, give or take. But really, I like to use the analogy that the antibodies are like your body's standing army. They are ready to go at a moment's notice and ready to attack like crazy. But after those antibodies have, laid down their arms, so to speak, to stay in the military metaphor there, our body can still remake them rapidly, assuming the same foreign invader is detected. So with the concerns of the antibodies only lasting 3 months, your body will still have memory T cells able to remake those antibodies and get the army back up to go if it does see the same spike protein, which, as Jill said, we're going to see the drift, but hopefully we can have our bodies ready to go enough that the antibodies we can reproduce are going to be good to go and ready to go to war again.
I love when you guys break out your analogies and your illustrations. It's a lot of fun. Here's a good question from the Q&A. And this may take us into a conversation for a little while about perceptions, misperceptions, misunderstandings, etc. Do we know how it affects pregnant women or women planning to have children? And I guess it could be either the virus or it could be a vaccine conceivably, but I suspect they mean coronavirus.
So that's an excellent question, and one that has been circulating quite a bit. There has been more amount of misinformation surrounding COVID-19 and infertility or pregnancy than I have ever seen surrounding anything with that particular topic. This information started because a paper found that the spike protein, that red part of the coronavirus that everybody seems to see, has a little bit of overlap with one tiny section of the placenta. So to put that into perspective, we use these things called blast searches. Boom, right? Scientists like to play with those kinds of terms, but a blast search means that you are looking for homology. You're looking for overlap between 2 different types of biological molecules, okay? And if you were to do a blast search between a human and a chicken, you would find about 27% homology. And here's the reason. We have 4 nucleotide bases in our DNA. We have 4 nucleotide bases in our RNA, and we only have 20 amino acids. That's it. Everything that is living on this planet is made up of that. So everything has homology. Everything has overlap. You overlap with the maple tree in your backyard. Okay. So to put that into perspective, it's fair that they did that and looked, but there is no evidence anywhere that says that that overlap is going to cause our bodies to attack the placenta. So here's another thing about pregnancy. When a female is pregnant, her body goes into a sort of immunosuppression. That baby is half the father, which is not her. If her immune system did not go into a type of immune suppression, then there would be repercussions for the developing child. So she's already kind of immunosuppressed. Anybody who's been pregnant or knows anything about that knows that there are certain things pregnant women aren't allowed to eat. There are certain things pregnant women can't, consume because they're worried about pathogens, because that immune response is suppressed a little bit to protect the baby. That placenta is the greatest thing in the world. It will protect that baby from so many things. And that cross-reactivity has not been seen anywhere. There's been no decrease in the birth rate since COVID-19 has come out. In December of 2019, there has been no decrease in the birth rate. It hasn't even slowed down. In fact, some of you are having a lot of fun and having babies while in quarantine, right? So that hasn't happened, fair. And we've seen individuals, pregnant women who were working healthcare professionals who have chosen to take the vaccine, and they themselves didn't have any issues with their children that were being born. There have been studies on mothers who have had COVID to check their babies afterwards. There have been studies looking at the distribution of pregnant women who have already chosen to get the vaccine, and there has been no decrease in the birth rate. And that's the biggest thing that you can hold on to and say, this isn't going to cause that. If we would have seen COVID-19 or the spike protein, because the spike protein is going to be in the vaccine, but it's also on the virus. If we would have seen that kind of an issue, we would have seen a decrease in the birth rate, and that's not happening. It's just not happening. So it's like whenever the power goes out and everybody decides to go to bed, maybe they all decided to go to bed and have babies over COVID too. We still haven't seen a decrease in the birth rate. So rest assured that that one is certainly misinformation. And please know that I made some jokes there because let's talk about sex, baby, right? But you get the idea. It really is. It's safe. It's not going to cause infertility. Your 16-year-old daughter is not going to need to worry about giving you grandchildren. She's going to be okay. Maybe some other thing will change her mind, like, law school, but she'll be fine otherwise.
The person who asked that question came back and asked, can we change the "it" to the vaccine instead of just the virus? I mean, can we address what the impact is? Is there any impact of vaccines on either fertility or pregnant women?
So it's getting dark in my room, so I put on the light. I don't know if the sun went down, so I apologize for that. But no, the vaccine itself is also safe. The vaccine, all of them actually, the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine both carry the spike protein. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine carried the ability to make the spike protein, and that spike protein is not associated with any kind of infertility. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has a different delivery system. It uses a common cold virus. So if that particular delivery system were to cause infertility, we would already see problems with it because everybody gets 4 colds a year anyway. Some of us get seven, but the average human gets 4 colds a year. The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines delivery system are they're lipids. So think it like encased in butter, right? It's a vaccine that's sort of surrounded in, or better solution. If you've ever mixed oil and water together, those little bubbles of the oil that are in the water, that's what that vaccine delivery system is similar to, so that it can merge in with your cells, and your cells have the same kind of coating around them, and it will merge into those cells. So you don't see any issues with the delivery system because those things are already present in our bodies as well. So there is no validity at all to the idea that the vaccines cause infertility.
Thanks. I mean, and Jill, before we move on, and Matt, I apologize, we're going to stay with one more women's issue, and that's breast cancer. Can you, I know you're prepared to talk about that as it relates to COVID and those types of concerns.
Yeah, so there's been some things that were said that individuals misinterpreted. So what happened was a few statements came out saying that if you had the COVID-19 vaccine, we don't want you to get a mammogram. We don't want you to worry about that because it could create some issues and make the mammogram harder to see, and then we wouldn't be able to find your breast cancer or something along those lines. And so that, like the telephone game, I'm totally showing my age here, but if you've ever played that game before, right, where you say one thing and then you pass it down the line. In the case that happened with that is that got turned into the vaccine can lead to breast cancer. And fair, that is a fair way of the gossip chain moving down, but that is also misinformation. It's information that was misconstrued. The issues associated with the COVID-19 vaccinations and breast cancer involved the fact that they didn't want you to get a mammogram right within the 2 weeks after you have gotten your COVID vaccination, either first or second dose, whichever it was, because the way our bodies work is, you got your COVID vaccine into your muscle, into your delt, and then it travels to the closest lymph node. So you've probably been to the doctor and they test your lymph nodes to see if they're swollen, if you have like a head cold or a sinus infection. Well, we have lymph nodes all over our body, and there are lymph nodes in our armpit. And so when a mammogram is occurring and they place your breast and they squish it down like so, and then they look for things, they're looking for inflammation, they're looking for different kinds of density associated with the breast tissue. If you have had a vaccination, your lymph node in that area is going to be swollen and it's going to be dense, which will mask any other kinds of things that they could see with that mammogram. And so instead, what they wanted you to do was just delay your mammogram a little bit, not because it caused breast cancer, but because it caused a normal immune response to make your lymph nodes swell, which would make it harder to read the mammogram. So nothing going on there with breast cancer and COVID-19. It's more just wait a little bit because we need to be able to see that density in the breast tissue if there is cancer there.
Do you have any thoughts specifically for women who maybe have had surgery related to breast cancer? There may be some things we need to let them know. I don't know if there's anybody in that situation with us tonight.
I'm not exactly sure about that. I guess, could you give me a little bit more about?
I just remember getting a question, and we do this question and answer a situation where the person was asking about which arm should I get my shot in if I've had if I've had surgery and those types of, because of the lymph nodes and
that. Yeah. Okay. So that is fair. If you've had your regional lymph nodes removed due to sentinel discovery. So oftentimes when an individual has any form of cancer, the cancer could be what we call organ confined, meaning that it's inside of the organ, or it can have moved to a regional lymph node. From there, it can move to other tissues in the body, which we refer to as metastases. If you have had the regional lymph node removed as a sentinel thing, where they take it out just to make sure there aren't any cancer cells in there, it could be a good idea to get the vaccine in the other arm, just to make sure that way you have that regional lymph node. If you don't, that's okay, because the way our lymphatic system works is that it'll move from each lymph node to each lymph node as it goes through literally everyone. If it starts down in your, behind your knee. It's going to hit nearly every lymph node on its way up to where it gets back into your cardiovascular system by your heart. So there will be others that it could travel through and around if that's the case. But if you don't have a choice, don't worry about it. If you do have a choice, pick the other side.
Want to let our audience know that we do have 2 upcoming forums already scheduled on April 20th, which is a week from tonight. We'll be looking at the parallels between COVID-19 and the 1918 flu pandemic. And that's a UPJ research project that both of our scientists on this panel have been involved with, along with some of their colleagues. So we'll be talking about that next week on Tuesday evening at 7. Then a week after that, on the 27th, we'll be looking at the pandemic's impact on higher education, which should be a fascinating conversation. Do you want to just give us a teaser about that project where you've been looking at the parallels between the 1918 flu and what we've been going through? Matt, maybe that's a good one to circle back to you. You've been too quiet for too long.
Well, it's one thing. I've been talking to one of my colleagues at UPJ, Dr. Paul Newman, and he's put out a lot of the eerie similarities being there were war parades during the 1918 pandemic that became super spreader events. And in the back of my head, I think to myself, well, gee, we're not gathering in large places with a complete disregard for caution. That would be preposterous. And then I turn on the news. And it's eerie to see how many parallels there really are. I mean, I was actually just at the Mutter Museum, and they have a huge exhibit dedicated to the Spanish flu back in 1919. And there's a little rhyme they had, which really stuck with me because I'm sure we see a lot of people nowadays not wanting to wear their masks. They say it's uncomfortable. But there was a little rhyme they had: obey the laws, wear the gauze. Mm-hmm. People were making masks out of just gauze and elastic ties to sort of eliminate that spread back then. And really the parallel is almost eerie because I have a number of masks made by a friend of mine who she's knitted the cotton over several times, created several layers. And, we've seen a lot of mask mandates going out and being rescinded in various areas. The parallels are just scary.
There's your teaser to next Tuesday night's conversation about the 1918 flu pandemic and COVID-19. We've got one more question from the audience. It looks like probably a good one to wrap up on. We're about out of time. And we'll throw this out to either or both of you. What can people expect in terms of non-severe side effects after their vaccination? Are there any data to support a difference between the vaccines that are available now? And this person says, I've heard questions about that in the community. So that's a good one, I think, to wrap up on.
I can speak to my experience. I personally had the Moderna vaccine. I'm pretty sure, Jill, you had the Pfizer, correct?
Correct.
And we had very different experiences. After my first dose of the Moderna, I had the standard sore arm, a little bit of redness, tenderness. I had to learn to sleep on my other side that night. But within a couple days, that had cleared up. It was the second dose for the Moderna that really just sort of knocked me out a bit. I had a class the next day at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I said to my students, I know we normally have a little bit of a lecture before I send you to breakout rooms to work, but please just go to the breakout rooms and work. I'm not up to teaching today. And I was concerned initially that this is bad. This is not good. I felt very fluish, very fatigued. I just had no energy to do anything. And the next day, within a 24-hour turnaround, it's as if a little switch flipped. I was right back to normal. I was back to my usual bad joke telling self.
Yes. I had the Pfizer vaccine, and I have a background in immunology. So I was expecting it to cause all of these issues for me. And I was like, I'm going to get a headache and my arm's going to hurt and I'm going to have a little bit of a chill and I'm going to be tired. And none of that happened. None of it. And so then I was like, did it work? But I know that it does work and I didn't have any issues, but I did push a lot of water. I did drink a lot of water that day. I normally drink like 8 or 9 glasses of water a day. I think I may have drank like 20 glasses of water that day. I think I was going upstairs to my restroom at least every 15 minutes that day. So I can tell you that if you can push a lot of water, it will help with the situation and that response to the vaccine.
For either of you, was there anything you wanted to bring up that we didn't get to yet, just so before we wrap up? I think we had a pretty good dialogue about getting vaccinated despite people's fears and concerns, right?
Right.
would
I
say-
guess just if you have questions, seek out some good answers that maybe test what you think that or that if you are a little bit hesitant, reach out to maybe your doctor or a friend of yours that it happens to be in the clinical practitioners or something along those lines. Go to In This Together's website. We've got a lot of good answers there. Reach out and ask the questions, and then hopefully you'll choose vaccination as well, but keep wearing your mask.
Nice one. Also add to that really quickly. I know with all of this, people have sort of moved away from the language of these are unprecedented times. And I just want to say to everybody, it's okay to be nervous and scared about things. These are still unprecedented times. We haven't hit a point of precedence yet. It's only been a year, which in the scale of things seems both large and small. I mean, I spend most of my downtime just trying to figure out what's new, just keeping my finger on the pulse. And even that, it definitely stresses me out a lot to constantly be bombarded with the information. I was like, it's okay to be nervous about things. That's why, as Jill said, don't be afraid to ask somebody a question. People are willing to help and answer whatever you may be afraid about, because with a lot of the stuff we've talked about tonight, I've spent the last few days just trying to learn more about it myself, trying to make sure that I'm educated enough to help others. So just got to keep powering through. I know, and as I say, we haven't heard it in a while, so we still are in unprecedented times.
Good point. Thank you very much to both of my two favorite scientists, Matthew Tracey and Jill Henning from Pitt-Johnstown. Thank you both for all your insights. Thank you to In This Together Cambria for sponsoring and putting on these forums that we've been continuing to have each week, the University of Pittsburgh and Johnstown and the Tribune-Democrat. And folks, hopefully you learned something tonight, and stay safe out there. Take care.